Welcome students. Today we will talk about counseling and its various types. And the objectives of today's discussion will be to know about three basic types of counseling, to know about the meaning and steps taken in directive counseling, to know about the meaning and steps taken in non-directive counseling. Lastly, we will talk about the meaning and steps taken in eclectic counseling. Counseling is a generic service of students' personal work, having a wide range of activities and includes faculty advising, counseling in psychological clinics, mental hygiene, and other specialized types of counseling. It is a body of techniques which helps young individuals to grow up normally through a guided learning. Counseling has proved to be very useful for the development of an individual student. College and universities, industries, and business establishments are becoming increasingly interested in counseling and its potential for improving interpersonal relationships. Counseling is a dynamic and purposeful relationship between the people in which procedures vary with the nature of the student's needs, but in which there is always mutual participation by the counselor and the student with the focus upon self-classification and self-determination by the student. Counseling is classified into different types. This division is done on the nature of the counseling process and the role played by the counselor. There are three main types of counseling. They are directive, non-directive, and eclectic counseling. In directive counseling, counselor is active. In non-directive counseling, counselor is passive. And in eclectic counseling, the counselor can alternate between directive and non-directive methods. These types can be fully explained and understood as directive counseling. Directive counseling or counselor-centered counseling was given by E.G. Williamson. In this type of counseling, counselor plays a major role in directing the counselee to think by informing, explaining, interpreting, and advising. A major goal is to replace the emotional behavior of the individual with the deliberately rational behavior, although dictatorial advice is avoided. Under this process, the counselor plans the counseling process. His work is to analyze and identify the exact nature of the problem and provide various options. Directive counseling revolves around the counselor. In this, the counselor is active and he expresses his ideas and attitudes independently. He evaluates expressions of the client. According to this point of the counselor, organizes the counseling interview. In this, the counselor asks a series of standardized questions carrying short answers. He leads as an expert, evaluates, and gives suggestions. This type of counseling is a concept where educational and vocational guidance relate to the personality dynamics and interpersonal relationship. This type of counseling is more useful where the individual wants information and advice for choice of a career. This approach does not focus its attention on personality development as such. Now we will talk about the basic assumptions of directive counseling. As far as Will is concerned, basic assumptions of directive counseling are competency in giving advice. The counselor possesses the required training, information, and is more competent to provide an advice to the counselee. Counseling as an intellectual process. Counseling is primarily an intellectual process which stresses upon the intellectual aspects of a person instead of emotional aspects of the personality. Counseling objectives as problem-solving situation. The objectives of counseling are achieved through problem-solving situation. Client's incapability of solving the problem. The counselor does not possess the capability for solving the problem always. As far as the characteristics of directive counseling are, counseling plays a vital role in the directive counseling. Counselor is very active and plays major role. Counselor leads the interview and the counselee subordinates him. Focus is the problem, not the person. More stress is laid upon the counselee's intellectual aspect than his emotional aspect. Counselor owns entire responsibility of solving problem. Steps of directive counseling. Williamson has given 6 steps of directive counseling process. They are analysis. It includes collection of information about the individual, which can be collected through structured interviews, psychological case history methods, interaction with family members, friends, etc. Synthesis. After collection of data, the information is organized in the logical manner to analyze the individual in terms of his qualifications, assets, potentials, liability, adjustment, cultural background, habits, etc. Diagnosis. The third step consists of the interpretation of the data in relation to the nature and the causes of the problem. Prognosis. Under this step, a prediction is made about the future development of the problem. Counseling. The counseling here is to bring about adjustment and readjustment to the individual in relation to his problem. Attitudes and interests of the individual are considered during the counseling. It emphasizes the individual to develop life cycle where an effort in the positive direction could lead to success, and success in turn could lead to further efforts and motivation. Last one, follow-up. The sixth step in directive counseling is follow-up, which is extremely important. An individual may be able to solve immediate problems through counseling, but new problems may occur or the original problems may reoccur. Follow-up with the client is extremely necessary. The role of counselor is important as he has to make the individual understand and accept his strength and also his weakness and faults. Advantages of directive counseling. This method saves time. In this type of counseling, there is more focus on the problem. The counselor can examine the client more objectively than the client himself. Counseling focuses more on the intellectual aspect of the person than emotional aspect of the personality. In this process, the counselor becomes readily available to help, which makes the client very happy. Disadvantages of directive counseling. In this process, the client is more dependent. He is also less able to solve new problems of adjustment. Unless and until a person does not develop some attitude through experiences, he cannot make any decision himself. The counselor fails in serving the client to commit the mistakes in future. Scarcity of information regarding the client can create the possibility of wrong counseling. Emotional problems may not be better solved by directive counseling. Now, non-directive counseling. The main advocate of non-directive or client-centered or permissive counseling is Carl R. Rogers. This theory was developed in between 1930 and 1940. The theory believes that sufficient means of solving a person's problem are present within the person himself. This school of thought gives importance to the emotional problems and disapproves the diagnostic information as a part of counseling process. The client-centered counseling revolves around the client. In this, the client is encouraged to leading conversation and to express his own attitude, feelings, and ideas. The counselor mostly remains passive. He never interferes with the client's ideas, thoughts, feelings, and flows of expressions. The counselor helps the client in completing his conversation. Basically, the counselor makes his efforts to develop rapport and mutual feelings of confidence in the client. In this approach, open-end questions are asked. These questions are loosely structured. In the answer of these questions, the person projects his own personality. The main concern of the counselor is with the summarization of emotional contents told by the client. When the client is answering, he should be encouraged to speak in detail through proper methods. The client feels that the counselor really respects the client's ideas. He gets the impression from the types of questions which a counselor asks from the client, and the counselor is taking interest in the client. Basic assumptions of non-directive counseling. Tendency towards actualization. In the earlier writings of Rogers, it was emphasized that the people or client's growth and developmental capacity is that person's characteristic on which the methods of counseling and psychotherapy depend. Even after so many years, his opinion got strength that a person's inherent tendencies includes growth, adjustment, socialization, freedom, etc. This directional tendency is termed as actualizing tendency these days. Beliefs in the dignity of man. Rogers believes in the dignity of the man. He considered the persons capable of taking decisions and he accepts his right to do so. Man is trustworthy. Rogers also knows that the person behaves in an unreliable manner too. A person is born with some urges which must be controlled if healthy personality development is desired. Man is wiser than his intellect. When some organization is functioning independently and effectively, then the awareness is a very small part or component of the entire process. When the organization feels some difficulty in its system of functioning, this awareness becomes more sharpened and focused. Snyder has also mentioned the following assumptions of non-directive counseling. Number one, the client has a right to select the goals of his life. Number two, if the client is given an opportunity, he will select those goals which may possibly provide him great happiness. Number three, emotional disturbance inhibits a person's proper adjustment initially. Number four, in the counseling situation, one should reach very quickly at a point from where the client may be able to start functioning independently. Characteristics of non-directive counseling. It is a client-centered counseling. Open-ended questions are asked. A person is accepted in his originality and he is free to express his attitude. The entire responsibility is of client. It is based on the principle that a person has so much capacity and drive that he can grow and develop so that he may face the situation in reality. The counselor is passive to the maximum. In this type of counseling, there is closeness between the picture of the self drawn by the client and a desirable and an ideal picture of his own. Through this counseling, psychological adjustment in client improves. Client's behavior becomes more mature emotionally. Steps in non-directive counseling. Carl Rogers has given the following steps of non-directive counseling. Number one, defining the problem. First of all, the counselor should define the problematic situation. Free expression of feelings. After the first step, the client is made aware of the fact that he can express his feelings freely and the counselor approves this. Development of insight. The counselor goes on thinking regarding the client's new feeling along with the development of client's insight, and he goes on classifying all those new feelings. Classification of positive and negative feelings. After the free expression of feelings by the client, the counselor identifies his negative and positive feelings and classifies them. Now, termination of counseling situation. The counselor looks for a point where he can terminate the counseling situation after all the above steps. According to this school of thought, either the client or the counselor can suggest for such termination of counseling situation. Advantages of non-directive counseling. Development of the problem-solving ability. Unwanted tests can be avoided. Removes the emotional blocks. Help individual to bring out repressed thoughts and reduce tension. Leaves its impression for a longer time. Disadvantages of non-directive counseling. Slow and time-consuming process. If client is immature, it is not suitable. All the problems cannot be solved orally. Sometimes, due to the counselor's passiveness, the client hesitates in expressing his feelings. Not always successful. Eclectic counseling. Eclectic counseling is defined as the synthesis and combination of directive and non-directive counseling. It represents a middle status between the two extremes represented by the non-directive technique on one hand and the other directive technique on the other. In eclectic counseling, the counselor is neither too active as in the directive counseling nor too passive as in the non-directive counseling. He just follows the middle path between these two. The chief advocate of this type of counseling is F.C. Thorne. In eclectic counseling, the needs of a person and his personality are studied by the counselor. After this, the counselor selects those techniques which will be useful for the person. The main technique used are reassurance giving information, case history, testing, etc. In eclectic counseling, the counselor first takes into consideration the personality and needs of the counselee. He selects directive or non-directive techniques that seems to serve the purpose best. The counselor may start with the directive technique. When the situation demands, he may switch over to the non-directive counseling and vice versa. An attempt is made to adjust the technique to the requirements of the situation and the individual. Eclectic counseling is economical and effective technique. Basic assumptions of eclectic counseling. In general, passive methods should be used whenever possible. Active methods may be used with specific indications. In the early stages, when the client is telling his story, passive techniques are usually the methods of choice. This permits emotional release. Until simple methods have failed, complicated methods should not be attempted. All counseling should be client-centered. Every client should be given an opportunity to resolve his problems indirectly. Inability of the client to progress through therapy as using passive methods alone is an indication for utilizing more directive methods. Directive methods are usually indicating in situational maladjustment where a solution cannot be achieved without cooperation from other person. Characteristics of eclectic counseling. In this, objective and coordinating methods are used. In the beginning of counseling, client active methods are used and the counselor remains passive. In this, more emphasis is assigned to the job efficiency and treatment. The principle of low expenditure is emphasized. In such counseling, for the use of all the methods and techniques, the professional efficiency and skill of the counselor are must. Keeping in mind the need of the client, it is decided whether directive method or non-directive methods should be used. Making an opportunity available to the client is insisted so that he may find himself the solution of the problem. The leading exponent of the eclectic counseling, Thorne, suggested the following steps in the process. Diagnosis of the cause. Intake interview establish rapport, collect case history from parents, teachers or other concerned persons. Plan is formulated for diagnosis. Analysis of the problem. The collected information is given to the client to improve his self-understanding. The counselee has to achieve emotional release and insight. He has to change his perception and attitude about himself and his situation. Closing phase. During the closing phase, the counselee makes a decision and plans, changes behavior and solves the problem. Tentative planning. Preparation of a tentative plan for modifying factors. Securing effective conditions. Securing effective conditions for counseling. Developing adjustment. Interviewing and stimulating the needs of the client to develop his own resources and assume its responsibility for trying new modes of adjustment. Proper handling of related problems. Proper handling of any related problem which may attribute to adjustment. Advantages of eclectic counseling. The counselor is neither active like directive counseling nor passive like non-directive counseling. The need and the personality of the client are studied and then the techniques are selected. The main techniques used are reassurance, giving information, case history, testing. No definite rules are followed. Disadvantage of eclectic counseling. Some people are of the view that eclectic counseling is vague, opportunistic and superficial. Both directive and non-directive counseling cannot be mixed together. In this, the question arises how much freedom should be given to the client. For this, there is no definite rule. The problem with an eclectic orientation is that counselors often do more harm than good if they have little or no understanding about what is helping the client. Coordinative methods are used. Now lastly, we will conclude with that there are three main types of counseling. They are directive, non-directive and eclectic counseling. Directive counseling was given by E.G. Williamson. In this type of counseling, counselor plays a major role in directing the counselee to think by informing, explaining, interpreting and advising. Carl Rogers was the main advocate of non-directive counseling. This theory believes that the sufficient means of solving a person's problem are present within the person himself. F.C. Thorne is the chief advocate of eclectic type of counseling. It represents a middle status between the two extremes, represented by the non-directive technique on one hand and the directive technique on the other. In eclectic counseling, the counselor is neither too active as in directive counseling nor too passive as in the non-directive counseling. He just follows the middle path between these two. With this, I thank you all and hope that this lecture on types of counseling has helped you a lot.